Hello students, I'm Dr. Madhvika Mathur. Today, we will discuss The Myths and Legends of Wasteland by T.S.Eliot. The Wasteland, which is the most widely translated and read English poem, a poem known for its obscurity and intellectual quality. So I'll begin with a quotation of Herbert Reed about T.S. Eliot. Reed said, "The man I knew in all his reserve was the man he wished to be, a serious but not necessarily a solemn man, a severe man never lacking in kindness and sympathy, a profound man, profoundly learned, profoundly poetic, profoundly spiritual, and yet to outward appearance a correct man, a conventional man, an infinitely polite man, in brief, a gentleman." About the poet, Thomas Stearns Eliot. He was an eminent poet, an essayist, playwright, a publisher, literary critic, and editor. He was one of the 20th century's major poets. He was considered as the central figure in English language modernist poetry. He became a British citizen at the age of 39, renouncing his American citizenship. In 1948, Nobel Prize in Literature was awarded to him for his outstanding, pioneering contribution to present-day poetry. He attracted widespread attention for his works: The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, The Wasteland in 1922, The Hollow Man, 1925, Murder in the Cathedral in the year 1935, and The Cocktail Party, 1949. So these are some of his works, the important ones, which I have quoted. Coming to the poem, The Wasteland. T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland is an important landmark in the history of English poetry. It is a long poem of about 440 lines, bifurcated in 5 parts, entitled The Burial of the Dead, A Game of Chess, The Fire Sermon, Death by Water, and 5th part is What the Thunder Said. स्टूडेंट्स, आपको कई बार नेट में या कॉम्पिटिटिव एग्जाम्स में इस पे क्वेश्चन आता है. They ask you about the sequence of these parts, the 5 parts. So this is the actual sequence, and you should try to learn it like this itself. So first part is the burial of the dead. Second is a game of chess. Third, the fire sermon. Fourth, death by water. And fifth, what the thunder said. So this poem, it was written during the autumn of 1921. At the time, he was recovering from serious breakdown of health. There were other household problems that he was facing. His wife, she had mental derangement, and it was the time of nerve-shattering impact of World War I. People were, and their lives were devastated by World War I. So this poem, it expresses the disillusionment of a generation. It mirrors the gloom and despair of the poet. Now about the sources. Source यानी वो books जिससे एलियट इंस्पायर हुए लिखने के लिए और जहां से उन्होंने सोर्सेस लिए, मिथिकल सोर्सेस या जो लेजेंड्स जो थे उन्होंने इन बुक्स में से लिए. So it was on the evening of the composition of The Wasteland that T.S. Eliot had been reading Jessie L. Weston's book from Ritual to Romance, and Sir James Frazier's book, The Golden Bough. So from Weston's book, From Ritual to Romance, he got the idea, or he borrowed the idea of the legend of the Grail and the Fisher King. And from the book, The Golden Bough, he derived his knowledge of a number of vegetation and fertility myths and rituals. Other sources include the Hindu Upanishads, the Bible, Buddha's fire sermon, and many more other sources are there. I've mentioned the important ones. So these myths are the fundamentals to understand this poem. Therefore, these myths and legend, they act as the objective correlative for the poet's emotion. हमें इस पोम को अगर अच्छे से समझना है तो उसके लिए ये जो मिथ्स हैं, ये जो लेजेंड्स हैं, जो कहानियां हैं, जो इनके साथ जोड़ी गई हैं, जिनको सिंबल के तौर पर इसमें यूज किया गया है, उनकी जानकारी होना, उन्हें अच्छे से समझना हमारे लिए बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट है. तो ये जो वीडियो है ये myths और legends पर based है. So I'll begin with the legends. The very first one, the Grail legend. So the Holy Grail. So now the question is, what is a Grail? So here it is the cup or the dish. The cup or the dish, so which was used by Jesus Christ. So the legend is a medieval legend associated with the adventures of King Arthur and his knights of the Round Table. So the Grail, it was the cup or the plate which was used by Jesus Christ for his Last Supper, in which the blood of the Savior was collected when he was crucified. So इसमें इन्होंने अपना Last Supper अंतिम भोजन किया था, और जब इन्हें क्रूसिफाई किया गया तो इनके ब्लड को इसी ग्रेल में, इसी कप में इकट्ठा किया गया था. This holy vessel, it acquired miraculous properties. It said that it had some medicinal properties as well. Therefore, it became an object of devotion. But after some time, the Grail disappeared mysteriously. It disappeared from the chapel, and then many bold knights, they staked their lives, they even lost their lives in the arduous task of procuring this Holy Grail. So ये जो Holy Grail थी, जिसमें जीसस क्राइस्ट के ब्लड को इकट्ठा किया गया था, उसे कलेक्ट किया गया था, ऐसा कहा जाने लगा कि कुछ समय के बाद इसमें मेडिसिनल प्रॉपर्टीज आ गई थी. So लोग इस ग्रेल को या इस कप को इसके पास इसके आके प्रे करा करते थे, और ऐसा कहा जाता था कि उनकी जो बीमारियां हैं वो उससे दूर होती हैं. बट एक दिन अचानक से ये जो ग्रेल थी, जिस चैपल में रखी हुई थी, वहां से मिस्टीरियसली डिसअपियर हो गई, वहां से गायब हो गई. और उसके बाद से कई सारे बोल्ड जो नाइट्स थे, उन्होंने अपना जीवन दांव पर लगा दिया कि किसी तरह इस ग्रेल को ये वापस ढूंढकर ला सके. और इसी सीरीज में टेनिसन, he wrote Sir Galahad, which is there in your course. BA में आपके कोर्स में थी ये poem. It is about the knight who went out in search of the Holy Grail. And in the same series, there is another knight, Sir Parsifal. So there are two spellings for that. One is Parsifal, and other is Perceival. So both the spellings are correct. Whichever you feel like, you can use that spelling. So number of knights, they had staked their life, and many of them even lost their life in search of the Grail. But it is believed that the lost Grail, it sometimes appears in the sky as a floating saucer of great beauty and splendor. but only a knight of virginal purity can procure it. ऐसा कहा जाता है होली ग्रेल के बारे में. Second one is the Fisher King. It is the legend of the Fisher King. So it is said that in due course of time, Sir Parsifal, who is the quester, and some of his fellow adventurers, they happened to arrive in a country which was ruled by the prince named the Fisher King. So it was the region where Holy Grail was worshipped. It was worshipped in a chapel known as Chapel Perilous. क्या नाम था उस chapel का? उस chapel का नाम था Chapel Perilous. And still the chapel was there, but it was in a broken state. And what had happened? It is said that the lost, it is said that the lost grail, it was hidden in that chapel. And at that time, the king himself, he had become physically wrecked. And what was the reason for that? That it was because of the sin which was committed by his soldiers in outraging the chastity of a group of nuns who were attached to the Grail chapel. Because of the sin of the king's soldier, what happened? This place, it was cursed. So this resulted in the impotency of the Fisher King. And this was reflected in the dry and barren land of his kingdom. So हम क्या देखते हैं कि Fisher King के soldiers ने जो sin किया by outraging the chastity of a group of nuns. So what happened? The result was the Fisher King was cursed. He became impotent. और जो symbolic reflection है वो किस चीज में है कि उनका जो राज्य था, उसकी जो जमीन थी वो पूरी की पूरी ड्राई और बैरन हो गई. पूरी तरह से वो जमीन बंजर हो गई. जैसे कि किसका रिफ्लेक्शन है वो? फिशर किंग का. The king, he waited with hope for the night of the pure soul. That night would come. He would visit his star-crossed kingdom. That night would do the ritual of washing the Fisher King's sinful body. And once that ritual is done, there will be the rebirth of the king. And that would be followed by the life-giving rains to the parched land. So, हमें इसमें क्या चीज समझ में आई कि फिशर किंग को भी इंतजार था उस पायस नाइट का जो उनके राज्य में आएगा. और इस तरह से एक भविष्यवाणी हुई थी कि जब वो नाइट यहाँ आएंगे और फिशर किंग की बॉडी को होली वाटर से वॉश करेंगे, तो ना सिर्फ फिशर किंग पे से बल्कि उनके किंगडम पे से भी वो कर्स हट जाएगा. वहां का जो पार्च्ड, जो ड्राई लैंड है वो फिर से फर्टाइल हो जाएगा. वहां उनके किंगडम में फिर से रेनफॉल होगी. सो दिस mystical wasteland of Fisher King, it symbolizes the contemporary decay and the spiritual sterility of the modern world. यानी जो हमारा modern world है उसको Fisher King का kingdom symbolize कर रहा है. जो उस समय स्थिति थी, more or less it is the same nowadays. Now coming to the central figure of this poem, that is Tiresias. He is also the connecting link. So Tiresias, he was bisexual and had prophetic qualities. He is blind, but he had the gift of prophecy and immortality. यानी हालांकि वो blind थे, लेकिन क्या चीज है, उनके पास गिफ्ट थी, गॉड गिवन गिफ्ट थी कि वो प्रोफेसी कर सकते हैं. यानी भविष्यवाणी जो करेंगे वो सच होगी, आगे का भविष्य वो बता सकते थे. और साथ ही साथ दूसरी चीज, he was immortal. That is, he would never die. And now what happened that he he became blind? क्या कारण था? So there is a story for that. It happened that he saw the goddess Athena bathing naked in a pond. So she was in great wrath, and the goddess, she struck him blind. But since his mother was a friend of hers, so she bestowed upon him the gift of prophecy as a compensation. यानी गुस्से में उन्होंने उनको ब्लाइंड तो कर दिया, बट क्योंकि उनकी मदर जो थी, टायरेशियस की मदर इनकी फ्रेंड भी थी, तो उन्होंने जब उनको कहा कि आपने ऐसा किया मेरे बेटे के साथ, तो उन्होंने उसको कॉम्पनसेट किस तरह से किया कि उन्होंने उनको गिफ्ट ऑफ प्रोफेसी दी कि चलो ब्लाइंड है कोई बात नहीं, बट ये प्रोफेसी कर पाएंगे. But according to another story, Tiresias saw two snakes copulating, and he disturbed them with a stick. And the snakes in wrath transformed him into a woman. 7 years later, again he disturbed another pair of snakes copulating, and they transformed him into a man once again. Thus, Tiresias has experienced life both as a man and as a woman. And when Jove and Juno had asked him, who is more passionate, man or woman? So he declared that women is more passionate. And at this, Juno, he got angry and he struck him blind. So these are the two legends that are associated with Tiresias. And thus, he is of the past and the present, and a suitable connecting link between the wasteland of Oedipus and the Fisher King. Next legend is of King Oedipus and his wasteland. Oedipus, he unwittingly kills his father and he marries his own mother. And thus he calls upon himself the curse of the gods in the form of plague, epidemic, and destructive. So Tiresias, the blind prophet, he is summoned and he tells the king the shocking truth that he, the king himself, is the plague spot. So nothing remains for the king but a prolonged penance, self-mutilation, self-abasement, self-exile, which eventually results in spiritual calm and inner illumination. So King Oedipus को खुद नहीं पता होता है कि उन्होंने कितनी बड़ा sin किया होता है. He kills his father and he marries his own mother. और इस वजह से उनके ऊपर gods का curse आता है और पूरे राज्य में plague फैल जाता है. So Tiresias उस समय भी थे, King Oedipus के टाइम में भी, और वो आके उन्हें बताते हैं, प्रोफेसी करते हैं, बताते हैं कि आप खुद जो है वो प्लेग का स्पॉट है. और फिर बाद में किंग बहुत टाइम तक पेनेंस करता है, पछतावा करता है, पूजा पाठ करते हैं, और फिर जाकर इस कर्ज से उन्हें मुक्ति मिलती है. Now the vegetation and fertility myths. Vegetation of god Osiris. So all primitive myths, nature myths especially, follow a common pattern of death, rebirth, and death. So winter is the death of the year, followed by rebirth in the spring. So जैसे ही winter यानी सर्दियों का मौसम आता है, वो क्या symbolize करता है? Death of the year. और फिर जब winter season खत्म होता है और spring season आता है, that is considered as the rebirth. So there is the loss of land's fertility in winter, but with the life-giving rain, life and vitality is reborn. यानी हम क्या देखते हैं? सर्दियों में लैंड की जो फर्टिलिटी होती है वो भी बहुत हद तक खत्म हो जाती है. फिर जब स्प्रिंग सीजन आता है, बारिश आती है, तो वापस से लैंड में वही वाइटलिटी और लाइफ फिर से आ जाती है. दैट इज रीबॉर्न. सो देयर इज अ कॉमन पैटर्न that we see in nature, which is death, rebirth, and death again. So vegetation god Osiris, he was stuck with corn grains and was buried in the earth, symbolizing the death of vegetation god. Soon the grains sprouted, symbolizing the rebirth of God. So this vegetation ceremony has been referred to in the opening lines of the burial of the dead. Symbolically, the recurrent pattern of birth and death stands for spiritual death as a result of sin and sexual perversion and spiritual regeneration, the result of suffering and penance. So इसमें हम क्या समझे कि वेजिटेशन गॉड जो है जिनका नाम क्या है ओसिरिस, सो उनकी एक एफिजी बनाई जाती है जिसमें बहुत सारा कॉर्न जो है ग्रेन्स है उनको उसमें फिल किया जाता है और फिर उनको अर्थ में बरी कर दिया जाता है, जमीन में उनको गाड़ दिया जाता है। और इस जो प्रोसेस को क्या कहते हैं, डेथ ऑफ द वेजिटेशन गॉड। फिर क्या होता है, रेन आती है, सो जो कॉर्न है इट स्टार्ट्स स्प्राउटिंग, यानी फसल उगनी शुरू होती है। दिस सिंबलाइजेस द रीबर्थ ऑफ गॉड। और इस तरह से ये जो वेजिटेशन सेरेमनी है, इस वेजिटेशन सेरेमनी को आप कहाँ देखेंगे पोम में, कौन से पार्ट में, द बरियल ऑफ द डेड। और क्या सिंबलाइज करता है ये, वही रेकरेंट पैटर्न ऑफ नेचर कि सबसे पहले डेथ, देन अगेन देयर इज रीबर्थ एंड देन डेथ। और मॉडर्न जनरेशन में, मॉडर्न वर्ल्ड में क्या है, इट इज द डेथ ऑफ it is not the physical death that he is talking to or he is talking about, he is talking about the spiritual death. And what is the reason behind that spiritual death? It has resulted from the sins of man, the sexual perversions of human beings. And coming to the last point, Adonis and Atis. These two are the corn gods. Like Osiris, Adonis and Atis were also corn gods associated with vegetation ceremony. So in some rituals in Egypt and other countries, the corn god was buried, while in some other, his effigy was immersed in the water of river. The coming up of the effigy signified the rebirth of the vegetation god. And the death by water section, it conjures up the image of this ceremony. So what is there in this about these two gods? जैसे हमने ओसिरिस god के बारे में पढ़ा, same is the case here. Again, it is associated with the vegetation ceremony. हम क्या देखते हैं इजिप्ट और बहुत सारी कंट्रीज में, इनफैक्ट इंडिया की बात भी हम इसमें करते हैं। हम क्या देखते हैं, जो कॉर्न गॉड होते हैं उनको बरी कर दिया जाता है, उनकी एक एफिजी, एक स्ट्रक्चर सा बनाया जाता है। तो कुछ कंट्रीज में तो उन्हें मिट्टी में, सॉइल में बरी किया जाता है और कुछ में उन्हें रिवर वाटर के अंदर इमर्स, उसमें डुबो दिया जाता है। जब वो एफिजी वापस तैरकर पानी के ऊपर आ जाती है, दैट इज सिग्निफाइड एज द बर्थ ऑफ द वेजिटेशन गॉड। और अगर वो सॉइल में उनको बरी किया गया था तो क्या चीज होती है, स्प्राउटिंग हो जाती है, यानी वापस से लाइफ। सो क्या चीज हुई, डेथ देन रीबर्थ, राइट, यहाँ पे रीबर्थ ऑफ द वेजिटेशन गॉड। एंड दिस थिंग हैज बीन डिपिक्टेड इन द सेक्शन द डेथ बाय वाटर सेक्शन। ये जो इमेजेस है ये आपको इस वाले सेक्शन में, लास्ट वाले सेक्शन में देखने को मिलेंगी। इसी तरह से there are some along with these two wastelands that we talk, first is the wasteland of the fisher king and the second is the wasteland of King Oedipus of Thebes. There is a third wasteland also, which is the biblical wasteland or the evil land of Emus. So these myths, they are very important to understand the wasteland, the poem. So I hope the different myths that I have explained, they are clear to you. And when you will go through the text of the poem, you will, and you relate these myths and legends with the incidences that are there in the poem, you will be able to understand the poem very easily. Although the poem is known for its obscurity, but I think, rather I believe, that if the legends and these myths are clear in your mind, you will be very easily able to relate the two things together. If you have any questions, do write in the channel. I'll be very happy to answer the questions. Thank you so much.